Okay, so moving on to two, part two of this particular lecture, which is chapter one, we're going to be talking about the history of why Texas looks the way that it does, of the population growth, the way why it grew the way that it did. We're going to be talking about some of the demographics in Texas, and we're going to be talking about the culture by region. So let's talk about the history first. Have you ever wondered why Texas looks the way that it does? Well, you know what? Texas is very old. It's older than when America was discovered by the Pilgrims on the Mayflower. So it's been over like 500 years ago that a Spanish explorer by the name of Alonso Alvarez de Pineda came to this area and discovered Texas. And when he and his crew came, what they said is that well, there were a lot of Native Americans. I mean, Texas was populated by Native American tribes, and so we kind of displaced these tribes. And so in the eastern pine forests, or the piney woods as they're called, there were Cherokees and Caddos. On the coast here, there were Karankawas, and in the western plains, there were Comanches, Apaches, and Kiowas. All right, we don't really have a very large Native American population anymore. As I said, they were displaced and a lot of them wound up in Oklahoma because that's known as Native America, and that's actually where I went to school. So yeah, they have a lot of reservations there. They have a lot of programs for the Native American population there. Texas only has one reservation, and that's the one where they call Lucky Eagle, where you go gamble, right? Okay, well, anyway, the reason that Texas started looking the way that it does now is that we call it immigrants, but guess what? Texas was part of Mexico. Surely you know that it was Texas and it was Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona, that part, and California. They were all part of Mexico until the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was ratified in 1848. Okay, and so at that time, what happened is that the people that lived south of the Nueces River, because the border with Mexico used to be the Nueces River, our Nueces River, and so that Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo changed the border to the Rio Grande, and in Mexico it's called the Rio Bravo. And so they said, and a lot of people were caught up in the middle because it was they lived in what was then Mexico, but they have property. Like that's how my family wound up in Texas. They had property that was granted to them by the Spanish crown. I mean, they were swindled out of it, but that's another story. But anyway, so at that point they said anybody that lives within this range, of between the borders has the opportunity to either stay where they are and become American citizens, or if they want to stay Mexican nationals, they need to move on the other side of the Rio Grande Valley. So they were the first immigrants. They were called Texicans. Okay, so if you've ever asked yourself, or if you've ever traveled, let's put it that way, and people ask you where you're from, what do you say? Do you say I am from the United States, or I'm American, or do you say I'm a Texan? Well, most people say I'm a Texan. I'm from Texas. And so then people say, well, then, do you have a horse? And I say, I wish, where's your 10-gallon hat or whatever. But anyway, but there's really no typical Texan. There's a lot of cultural diversity of your belief system that we were talking about a little, in the last lecture, of what you believe based on the region where you grow up. But there's a lot of homogeneity, means the sameness. It means that we are Texans and we are very proud Texans, and we will defend the Texans, regardless. It doesn't matter. If you're a Texan, that means you're part of my family. There's a lot of homogeneity. So this diversity runs along cultural regions. And so you can see as it is expressed in the culture, the attitudes, and the belief systems within each particular region. And we're going to go through some of the regions that have been identified in the book. And there is a graphic that has a map of Texas that has different colors and different regions. Okay, so regionally, it's based on ethnic and cultural groups. It's based on where they settled, how they set up these colonies. Well, I mean, part of Texas, but they were like colonized in a way that different groups kind of set up, in that their culture was reflected in that area. And there's 9 regions that have been identified. Okay, so this is the map here. So you can see that it ranges from. We'll start with the Gulf part. And so that's all the way up to Houston from Corpus, all the way up to like Houston, Beaumont, that type over there. Okay, then we have the South Texas, which is the gray part, which is the border, all of the border Del Rio, and then we have the let's see, what do they call it? Mm, East Texas, which is a light gray, that's Longview, Tyler, that area. We have the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex region. We have Central Texas, which is in San Antonio. We have the German Hill Country, which is that lighter blue. And then we have West Texas and the Panhandle and then far West Texas. So let's talk about some of these regions, the way that they're split up in the book. We're going to start with East Texas. And so East Texas, I called it the Piney Woods just a little bit ago. And so what I want to talk about, two things. I want to talk about their politics, their culture, their politics, and their economy. So they in the East in East Texas they seem to have the same characteristics that are reflected in the Old South. And so some of these characteristics are that they are rural, they are biracial, and they are segregationists. This is an area where the Ku Klux Klan is still very active. You can kind of think of this more as like the plantation society. So their wealth money comes from real estate, from banking, from construction, and from retail. They they also have an agricultural component. Most areas in Texas do have an agricultural component, except the very urban areas. So in this particular part, they have cattle, they have poultry, and the timber. They call it the piney woods because it's got forests, the piney woods of Texas. And so they will mill that timber in order to produce lumber, whatever. Okay, so people get educated in that area, but there's no jobs really. So what they do is they usually go to Dallas to find jobs, and that's called brain drain. It means you get educated in one place, but you move someplace else to get a job, and that's usually the way that it works, right? If you have to go to where the jobs are, but what that does is that it creates a leakage, means that they don't keep the human capital there in that area. Now, when it comes to their attitudes and beliefs, when I talked about political socialization in the last lecture, I told you it depends on how strongly you live your religion. Well, in this particular area, people really do live their religion based on fundamentalist principles of Protestantism, and it shapes their attitudes, their values, and beliefs of how they're going to conduct their lives, their political lives, their social lives, their cultural lives. So in this particular instance, when it comes to East Texas, these people tend to be, or the residents of these people, the residents of this area tend to be more conservative, politically conservative. Then we get to the Gulf Coast, that's our area, and that's all the way up to Houston. And so this petroleum industry that we have has contributed to the growth of our region as well as Houston because we're known as cities that have a lot of refineries. So that oil boom contributed to it. It's part of our economy. It's been such a large part of our economy, especially here in the Gulf Coast in Corpus Christi, Texas, as it is in Houston, Texas. They are both important shipping centers. Our port is becoming more and more important. The Port of Houston is huge. But our port is, I think they said it was like the fifth largest port, and they are dredging the port right now. They are building that new harbor bridge. The reason that they're building these things is that so they can bring in larger vessels. I think they call them large cargo vessels or something like that. And so they're saying that way we can, like load more stuff, and we can, it'll increase our economy. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Okay, so there has been a lot of population migration here too because people get educated, the ones that live in the Gulf Coast area, like even here in Corpus Christi, we educate you if you cannot find jobs, you will go to Houston or you'll go to San Antonio or you'll go to Austin or maybe even Dallas to be able to find jobs. So we also have a lot of problems keeping people here in the coastal area. If you're in Houston, there's a lot, it's a huge city. I think I heard just recently that it was something like 6 million people. Can you believe that? 6 million people. So, and they have a lot more jobs over there. Okay, and it is often said that, especially this area, is rural Texas in an urban setting. rural Texas in an urban setting. And so we also have an agricultural sector, and we raise all kinds of, like, I think there's cotton for sure, I think sorghum, corn. There's cornfields here within the city limits themselves. And anyway, so the wealth comes from oil, from construction, from land development. And so Houston has been able to diversify their economy, their economic base, due to several recessions that we have had in the past. There's one in the 70s, one in the 80s, one in the 2000s. It's 2020. Looks like we're going into one again. So now it seems to have more of a diverse economic base. I wouldn't say that's true of Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi's number one industry continues to be the refineries, the oil industry, the oil and gas industry. The port is also, we have had a lot of industries or a lot of businesses set up here in Corpus Christi, but they are like industries that are related to the production of the refineries, the byproducts of the refineries. So it's not that it's so diversified, although we have been able to build upon it, but it has not really become diversified. Then we get to South Texas. And South Texas is basically the valley all the way down to like Del Rio, from Brownsville to Del Rio, and then all that area around there. Well, that's kind of ranchero country. It's cattle country. The Rio Grande Valley has been known for the offshore types of industries. And so these are called the maquiladoras. And so basically both the NAFTA, which is now called it's only the United States, Mexico, Canada, the USMCA. So I mean it's basically NAFTA 2.0. But anyway, so basically this is what it is. They just renegotiated some of the terms for the USMCA, but the maquiladoras have been in existence for a long time, since the 60s. I think they started in about 1968. And so what it does is that it takes American-made raw materials and it ships them across the border. They will assemble it. Basically, they're factory jobs or assembly jobs, and then they'll ship them back to the United States, and the companies will pay for on the value additive labor, so it's cheaper for them. And so you could say this is a good thing or this is a bad thing, but basically, this is kind of how the NAFTA and one of the issues with the NAFTA was work related, labor related, because it was saying, you are shipping all of these jobs to Mexico, but that means that that the U.S. Workers are losing jobs because you're shipping them to Mexico. They're going offshore. They're going offshore. It's a problem, and it has been a problem. There's been some success in bringing some companies to reshore them. That's what they're calling, to reshore them, bring back to the United States, saying, if you bring them back, we'll give you tax breaks or whatever. Some companies have taken advantage of that. Now, South Texas tends to be very heavily Hispanic with very low SES, and SES is socioeconomic status, which basically means low income, low education rates. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the colonias and the environmental pollution that's down in the valley. Okay, so I told you about these these companies that are down there that are the factory, the assembly plants or whatever. Well, they have environmental regulations in Mexico, but they're not always enforced. There is this thing called like the bribe or the mordida. That's what it's called in Mexico. And so they just kind of look the other way. So consequently, a lot of the border area of Mexico is very polluted because they're byproducts of these factories that were making these products for Americans. One of the most polluted is down on the border, on the very tip, down the Cameron County, Brownsville, across in Matamoros, because what they're using is they have the chemical plants there, and so the chemical plants are always having these chemical spills and stuff, and all that stuff is winding up, in the soil, in the air, whatever. So that area also tends to be pretty polluted, and there have been a lot of health issues down there as well. Okay, this area tends to be bicultural. Bicultural meaning it's heavily, there's Anglos down there, but it's probably like maybe 95% Hispanic. But there, so bicultural, because, and that's saying part American and part Mexican, so bicultural in that way. Heavily Roman Catholic. They're agricultural based, sheep, goats, cattle, all kinds of agricultural products. And that was another thing that was negotiated with the USMCA about the agriculture, so that doesn't hurt our farmers. It's known as the border region or La Frontera. The whole area is the border region or La Frontera. And so they have many of the problems that are in Mexico are also on the border because even though there's a wall, even though there are restrictions of being able to come and go, there is still some cross-border activity, or let's put it this way, there was some cross-border activity. It seems to be diminishing at this particular point in time. Whatever affects the Mexican economy is going to affect the Texas economy. Whatever affects the Texas economy is going to affect the Mexican economy. Okay, so the German Hill Country then is like that area around Kerrville, Bandera, Fredericksburg. Okay, this was settled by the Germans. That's why they call it the German Hill Country. And so it's very European in its culture and just like the types of architecture that it has, the types of food that it has, whereas South Texas, this area from San Antonio down, it's very heavily Hispanic. So you find a lot of, taquerias at the corner, whatever, right? Over there, it's very much very European and very German in their cuisine. They have a big arts and crafts movement. A lot of times people will go to that area to settle on these artists, and they have like a big artist colony and stuff. There's a lot of wine production up there too, believe it or not. Anyway, so socially and politically, they tend to be more conservative, and it's called Texas Republicanism. And so they just kind of tend to be more conservative, not super super Tea Party or Freedom Caucus, but just more conservative than Texas as a whole. Whereas when I was talking about South Texas, they probably tend to be more liberal as a whole. When we talk about the parties, I'll be showing you some maps, and that whole border area is going to be pretty blue, pretty blue. All right, so the German Hill Country kind of fears encroachment of urban development from San Antonio and from Austin because if you drive like I-10 or if you drive I-35 from San Antonio, Austin, some of those back roads, there's just a lot of housing developments being set up, being developed. And so a lot of the little towns are very afraid that they're going to lose their particular identity. And one in particular is like Bernie, which is really kind of outside San Antonio, but it's considered part of the Hill Country as well. And so they're saying, we don't want to be part of San Antonio. Leave us alone. Okay, then we get to West Texas. West Texas was settled by an Anglo population, and again, they tend to be pretty much fundamentalist, pretty, Protestant. They live their Bible, in other words, part of that Bible Belt. So if they're Democrats, they can tend to be more conservative Democrats. If they're moderate, they tend to be more moderate Republicans. This is where George W. Bush has his ranch. What is it called? No, is it Crosby? No, what is it called? It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, okay. So they have a large agricultural area as well. They have sheep, they have cattle, they have goats, and oil production. Midland, Odessa, this is where they have the Eagle Ford, no, no, let me see, the Permian Basin shale. So that's a big vein that they're trying to explore right now. And so a lot of there was a pipeline that was built to get the oil, natural gas from that Permian Basin all the way down to us so that we can export it through the port over here. I tell you, the port's becoming really important. So yeah, so they tend to be more moderate in the way that they look at things, whether you're Democrat or Republican. That's the way that they live their lives. Okay, so then we get to the Panhandle, and the Panhandle is kind of different into its own. It has its own type of character. It tends to be more Midwestern than it is Texan. I mean, there are Texans there. They are considered to be Texans there, but it's just more it looks more like Oklahoma than it does Texas. And so for a while they wanted to succeed from Texas, and I'm not saying they could do it, but they thought that they could, but Oklahoma couldn't do it. Now, I don't know why they would want to be such a tiny state, but that's neither here nor there. But anyway, so that kind of didn't go anyplace. But basically, people that live in this area in the Panhandle tend to be very socially and politically conservative, and so they tend to be Republicans. And so they have an agricultural base as well, cotton and grains, and of course they also have a big presence of oil in that area as well. Then we get to North Texas. In North Texas, was established by the French, and they came in and they were these socialists that came in and they said we're going to set up a colony here in Dallas, and that colony is going to have its own flavor. It's going to be reflective of something very European, something more French. And so they brought in educated people, like they brought in MDs, they brought in teachers, they brought in musicians, they brought in scientists, and they said we want this to be, a cultural center. And I'm not saying that it's not. It doesn't look so much like that anymore, but that's the way it was originally set up. Fort Worth is also considered to be part of North Texas, but Fort Worth kind of seems to have like a little bit of a different character to me. I used to live up in that area also. Uh, Parts of Fort Worth can be considered more like, well, it's called Cowtown, USA, but like the downtown area. Parts of it are very urban, parts of it are kind of Western looking. So I don't know if it's more like West Texas or if it's more like urban Texas or North Texas. I guess it just depends on who you ask. Now, the economy in that area is heavily dependent on defense contracts. They have a big aerospace part there. They have one, I think it's maybe Boeing that's up there. Electronics are up there. That's what's his name? The one that ran for president that has a big Texas Instrument up there. Ross Perot, he was up there. They have the aircraft builders, as I said. But more to me, more than anything else, Dallas is kind of known for its financial centers in terms of like the banks. A lot of banks have their headquarters there. A lot of insurance companies have their headquarters there. AT&T moved their headquarters up there not that long ago, like maybe a year or so ago. But it's very urban in character. And so there have been a lot of people that have moved down to the Dallas area from the Frost Belt in order to find jobs because Texas has always been able to create jobs. We were lucky in that way. So people in the Frost Belt is considered to be like the like people that were making cars, like all of those jobs that were lost to the NAFTA. Okay, those were the people that were affected, and those were the people that came down to Texas to find jobs. And so the Rust Belt is usually like Illinois and Michigan and Ohio and that area around there. Okay, so finally we get to Central Texas. And Central Texas, that's where I'm from. I don't know if I told y'all or not, but I'm from San Antonio. And Central Texas is geographically, it's the triangle between Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Antonio. And so, if y'all don't know this, Austin is in the right in the middle, and it's the center of the in the center of the state, and it is the state capital. In the Austin region, there's a lot of high tech type industries. Like Dell has a big presence there. They have it's a kind of called the Silicon Valley of Texas. They have a highly educated workforce, probably one or the most. I saw not some figures not too long ago that they have more PhDs per capita than any other city in the United States. So a highly educated workforce. I have a PhD. In San Antonio, it's a little bit different than Austin. Their industry or their economy is more tourist based, more military, and they have a large medical presence. So tourism, because they have the Alamo, they have the Riverwalk, they have all of these things. So a lot of people go to San Antonio on vacation or whatever, and so that's part of their economy. There were many military bases there at one time. I think San Antonio may have had like 6 military bases. Now they're it's like maybe 3 or 4. So they've cut them down because of all of the brat closures or whatever. But there's still a large military presence. But when it comes to the medical stuff, if somebody in like one of the smaller cities like Corpus Christi, for example, gets sick, and if we don't have like the appropriate health care here in this area, you might get sent to Houston if you have cancer because they have that big MD Anderson hospital there, and they have a lot of like industries that developed around that, and that's why Houston had been able to diversify. Okay, well, San Antonio has everything to do with the heart, the cardiovascular stuff, thoracic stuff. So they have again a lot of like industries, like over by the University Hospital off of I-10. So a lot of like industry. So that's like a big industry for San Antonio. So it's very diverse. There's no single dominant trait. I would say when it comes to politically, Austin is definitely the most liberal of all of the cities in the state of Texas. And they have this branding that says keep Austin weird. San Antonio, their branding is there's no place else like San Antonio. San Antonio tends to be very the city core tends to be kind of like more liberal, but the suburbs tend to be more conservative. But there's really no dominant trait. It's kind of a mix of many things.